information economy has arrived. The world is teeming with innovation as new business models reinvent every industry. InsideAnalysis is your source of information and insight about how to make the most of this exciting new era. Learn more at InsideAnalysis.com.
InsideAnalysis.com.
And now, here's your host, Arick Goomanovsky.
All right, folks, welcome back once again to the only coast-to-coast radio show that's all about the information economy. It's time for Inside Analysis. Yours truly, Arick Goomanovsky here today, and the topic is a good one. Who are you, really? That's what we want to know. That's what machines want to know. That's what your systems want to know. Your network, your payroll system, for example, your ledger. They want to know who you are, really. Are you who you say you are? Authentication. We're going to talk about the intersection of identity and security today with an all-star cast of experts. We'll be hearing from Olden from Strata Identity. We have Steve Evans calling in from Teneo and Arick Goomanovsky from a company called Ermetic. So we've got a couple of software people and a services guy, but they all have something to do with the software that you use to protect your systems. And it's a big deal these days. You know, we were talking before the show about the SolarWinds hack and other major hacks. You look at world events in the last year or so. It's hard for me to believe that that big hack on the East Coast of the energy company, the name eludes me now, was not a foreign actor. It could brought down the gas transport, the pipeline, Colonial Pipeline, across the East Coast for days. People couldn't get gas. In retrospect, that was probably a foreign actor. It was ransomware, at least on the surface, but it goes to show you that there are vulnerabilities everywhere. Dole, the big Dole plant in the U.S. was taken down for about a day and a half, apparently. Other organizations are getting taken down, and it just goes to show you that you're never completely safe. I was joking that the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, is not really a job I would be very good at. I don't have nerves of tough it out every single day. And I even told my favorite joke from my business partner, Dr. Robin Bloor, who said in his British accent, every company has one person who does security, and his name is Scapegoat. And of course, when it goes bad, they just fire him and get someone new in there. But that's not good enough. Certainly not, it's not going to be good enough going forward. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So our first guest, let's bring in Arick Olden from Strata Identity. And Arick, you guys have a really interesting business model. As I recall correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, you figured out a way to abstract the policies around security out of different cloud environments and then host them in a graph-enabled environment that allows you to port policies from one environment to another. And let's face it, leaving a cloud environment, one of the hardest parts, of course, is the egress cost. But the other hard part is just all the policy that you have baked in there. How can you successfully extract that and then deploy it somewhere else? Well, without a solution like yours, that's a very difficult thing. With a solution like yours, it's not that difficult at all, which I thought was a very clever approach. But did I get that right?
Yeah, great summary. And yes, you did have it right. Thanks for having me on the show today, Arick. Yeah, what you're describing is the state that most organizations face today, which is a lot of fragmentation. People are using multiple clouds. They still have all of the infrastructure that's on premises. And so now you're stuck with a patchwork of different policies and different ways to secure and lock things down. And where I think about the world as an identity person is, that intersection of identity management, which is real simple, which I see in the simplest form is how do you manage users accessing applications and data? And that real simple thing turns into a really complex thing when you have to account for all of the different ways that different vendors have implemented access management and so forth. And to the fragmentation, I think the kind of like the metaphor would be, imagine if the policies that you use on AWS are written in English and the policies that you run on Azure are written in Japanese. And just with those two examples, it goes on and on, right? You've got dozens of different systems, but just using those two as an example, that if you have your policies that work really well in AWS, and you say, I want to apply those policies over on Azure, well, you're stuck because there's no common language to describe that. You'd have to translate English into Japanese. Furthermore, the way you actually set it up means you got to understand the APIs and all of the different configurations. So that gets even more complex. So to solve that, we worked with a number of different organizations and created a new standard called Identity QL or IDQL. And it's a single way in a declarative format to define your policies that will allow you to have consistency from AWS and to Azure and many other places. So the way that it works is that instead of having to manually go in and understand all of the policies you have set up on AWS and then do the heavy lifting of translating them into all of those same things over on Azure, what you can do is use a free open source tool called Hexa. And what that will allow you to do is to automatically point it at AWS and automatically understand what the policies are. And then it'll translate them from the native AWS policies into a generic IDQL policy. That's a declarative policy. You can read it, plain English. You don't have to understand any APIs. And then what you can do with that is say, hey, I want to translate the generic IDQL over to Azure. And the Hexa software will do that same process of translating IDQL into the native Azure policy. So what you've done there is break the lock-in for moving your applications and your data from one cloud to the other, because now you can have the same policies that worked in one cloud work in the other. And we call that policy orchestration. And as part of this new move for identity orchestration writ large.
Yeah, that's very important because no one likes lock-in. First of all, things change. You may discover that one cloud environment is much more suitable for your workloads, for your business than another. And you want to be able to pull that out and get somewhere else. And it also, I mean, here's the policy guy in me. It also helps better understand policies, how they work, what they do, how effective they can be, right? Because policy is just one tool in the arsenal of the executive. You have technologies, you have people, you have training, all sorts of different things. But to understand the nexus of policy and human behavior, especially over time, that's a nebulous thing. And there aren't too many people who are very good at that sort of thing. There's always the law of unintended consequences, for example. So you got to watch out for these things. So what gets me really excited about this is what you can learn, what people using this protocol can learn about how to define policies and how to make sure that you're not too loose or too tight, right, Arick?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a big part of it, that intersection of the human with the policy. It's very difficult to do in the world today because you don't have an easy way to link the two, because most of the time you're looking at it through one lens or the other. You may be looking at your user management in a directory or in a system like an Okta or an Azure Active Directory, but then you have the other side of the world, which is where all your applications and your data are. And those are typically managed in a different way. So really being able to join those two together gives the security professional the ability to see things in context. And that's the magic here, is that you can bring them together and understand how they relate to one another. And with this kind of model, you can finally answer the question of, for a user, let's say Arick, me, what are all the applications I have access to on whatever cloud that the organization uses? And you can do that in a consistent way. So part of the the Cloud Native Computing Foundation is where Hexa resides, and it's free for anybody. And we're always looking for more people to join and help make it better. But that's really the promise at the end of the day, is to make it consistent so you know what's going on, whether you're looking at your users, your applications, or your data.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. And I was just thinking this morning about cloud native and what cloud native really means. And it means you design your software in such a way that it should be able to be portable from one cloud environment to another. I think that is intrinsic to the definition of cloud native. And I think it's wonderful that you've taken this open source approach, which is the sort of de facto standard these days, by getting a community together, agreeing on a standard, and then we can all focus on what makes our business special, right, Arick?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the value to the, participants, or that, if we all work on a standardized format, we can grow the market. I was one of the early co-authors of the SAML standard back in the early 2000s. And there was a question early on, well, do you keep it proprietary or do you make it standard? And my view at the time was, let's bring it into Oasis so that it can be much bigger than my company at the time. And that turned out to be the case, because now everybody can use SAML and connect their different worlds and do that in a secure way. And it wasn't about a commercial interest on my part. It was more about having people be able to do more things that they wanted to without having the feeling like they're get locked into one vendor or make a decision that they can't change down the road. So standards have been phenomenal in terms of giving people the ability to do things and to change their mind and to have confidence that, hey, what I did here is going to work over there. And that may sound like a small thing to many, but when you actually go to practice it and you, for instance, find out that you didn't use a standard when you secured all of your hundreds of applications and you change it, now you're in for millions of dollars of rework. Whereas if you had a standard, you can just plug and play. Yeah, there's always work involved. I'm not saying it's magic, but you have a lot better shot of being able to do it if you use standards in the first place.
Yeah, that's a perfect point. It's actually a great segue to bring in our next guest out there. We've got Steve Evans from a company called Teneo, and stick around for the roundtable, Arick. But Steve, I'll throw it over to you. Arick really kind of hinted at the practicality agreements, or arrangement, I should say, that you really want to look for to prevent yourself from having huge chasms to cross in the future, right? One of my favorite cliches, it doesn't get much use these days, but it's a good one, is well begun is half done. Right? If you get off on the right foot, if you're going in the right direction, at least you're not wasting time, and you're basically prepared to solve the challenge. And security is something that everyone needs. So it's certainly a place where standards are going to be important. What do you think, Steve?
No, I agree 100% with that. Arick was right on point with that point about standards. One of the things that we've found with our customers, and again, just from a background perspective, as you said, we're a services company, right? So we don't make software. So I'm glad you guys are doing that, because that's hard work. But what we do is we have customers who have needs, and they have business goals, and that's the thing that I think a lot of folks start out wrong. We find that they start out looking for a tool. IT comes in trying to solve says, I need this tool, and they look at a tool, and then they kind of make everything else kind of fit around that particular solution or system or tool that they've purchased, when really the better way to go about it is for the business to be involved with IT, partner with them, come up with those standards that Arick talked about, so that you have those as the framework from the get-go on what you're trying to achieve. So once you have those policies in place, then it becomes a whole lot easier to go out and start assess different technologies to put in place to achieve those goals.
And obviously, security is always going to be important. And when I look at the predominance really of cloud computing these days, and the fact that we do have competition, thank goodness, it's not just one. You've got Microsoft, you got Amazon, you have Google. There are lots of other smaller players too, but they're the big guns in the industry. But you do want to be able to move around, and you do want a defensible position to take if you're a CISO, right? So I think it really does pay. And I see you guys do a lot of consultation with CEOs to just remind CEOs that this is an ever-changing dynamic, but basic policies are always going to come into play, and those standards are just crucial, so you don't waste time. And remember, when you do something that is off-label, let's call it, and you don't document that properly, or you don't make it known to other people, that's just a ticking time bomb, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, one of the, I think everybody was caught a little bit off by a guard, I would say, by COVID when it came to their posture in that regard. And everybody started scrambling around trying to get connectivity to everyone out there in any way that was possible. And a lot of times that was done in not the greatest of ways, right? We just open up a VPN, access VPN right into our network, and you authenticate one time, and you have access to everything. And obviously that's not what we're looking for. So, we really, if we'd had more standards in place, that would have been much easier transition. Now we're talking about things like ZTNA, right? Zero Trust Network Architecture, which is a framework around allows you to ensure that not only are you ensuring only the right people have access to only the right application, but only from the right location, only at the right time of day. And by the way, we're not going to do one single check, but we're going to do that all the time. So, sometimes you have users at home. Sometimes they're at a Starbucks. Maybe they're traveling overseas. So that location becomes important, and those policies become important. So that what you need is a way to manage that in a way that's standardized, something that can work across all these different platforms, whether it be Azure or AWS or any of the other cloud platforms. So the standards are really important for that regard, and we like to I think we always tell people it's important to partner with a company like Teneo, for example, who can help walk people through this, because it's not as simple as you would think it would be.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And you reminded me of a reality that a lot of people have dealt with, and that is you go on vacation somewhere. Even if you call your bank and tell them, like they ask you to, hey, I'm going on a vacation to Switzerland, nonetheless, you can show up and your card will be declined because for some reason either the connection didn't get through or just some part of the process was broken there. And that can be pretty frustrating. You're in a foreign country, now your credit card doesn't work to get into your hotel or whatever the case may be. But it's just another reflection of how these safeguards can cause disruption, can cause annoyance among your staff. And I guess one of the cool things, we've been kind of hinting at the new Kubernetes reality these days, this new underpinning of enterprise software, especially in the cloud, Kubernetes out of Google. One of the nice things is that it is so durable. It was designed to be durable. It was designed not to fall over entirely, just little teeny pods fall over. And so one piece of the website might not work. One thing may not go through as fast as you want it to, but overall the ship doesn't just sink, right? Which is how it worked in the old days. But we'll pick that one up after the break. Folks, don't touch that dial. You're listening to the only coast-to-coast radio show in the US of A that's all about the information economy, Inside Analysis. We'll be right back, folks. Don't touch that dial.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Arick Kavanaugh.
Oh, yeah. Take us to the future indeed, folks, where we all get access to the right apps and data that we want and need when we want and need it. And we don't have to constantly type our password into our phone all the time. I wish that the phone companies would work on that, the biometric stuff. Like, yeah, it's still my heartbeat. It's still me. Could you just let me into my phone, please? Especially when I'm driving. But folks, we're talking all about the nexus, the intersection of identity and security today. We've already heard from Arick Olden of Strata Identity and Steve Evans from Teneo. And next up, we have Arick Goomanovsky from Ermetic. Arick, tell us a bit about yourself, your company, and how you're protecting valuable data and applications.
Sure. Thank you, Eric. So we're at Ermetic, basically helping customers protect their public cloud infrastructure environments. We work with, Fortune 10 enterprises that are very traditional and right now moving their data center into the cloud, and they have, targets to move 40% of their data center, huge data center to the cloud next year and things like that. And also with the most innovative, cutting edge cloud first companies that never had a single server in their on-premise environment. And what we've discovered in working with both large and small companies across a variety of industries, that people take a very traditional view of the cloud and cloud security in general, right? The traditional security vendors have looked at the cloud the same way they looked at on-premise environments, meaning focusing mostly on the network perimeter and securing workloads. But in fact, if you look at a cloud and you try to understand what's the big difference between cloud and on-prem, you realize that the nature of the perimeter really changes when you're moving to the cloud.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, networking perimeter still present, but it's way less important. If you look at the big cloud service providers like AWS, Azure, GCP, they all over hundreds of different services: compute, storage, managed databases, big data analytics, data science services. Now, out of those hundreds of services, only a handful you can protect with a networking perimeter, because in order to protect a resource with network, it has to have an IP address. If it doesn't have a network entity, network doesn't apply. What does apply in the cloud is the identity perimeter. Every service is managed by users, and these users, those could be human users, but also application users. These users have permissions, and if they have sensitive permissions, they can cause a lot of damage. So really, the nature of the perimeter and also the nature of the attack surface really changes once you're moving your workloads from one premise to the cloud. And this is where we kind of bring a lot of innovation to the market.
Yeah, but those are excellent points around how you can do security and what you can actually do. And you just have to remember these are different environments. And, as you were talking there, I was reminded in my head here of the the shared responsibility around security that all the big cloud vendors talk about, which reminds me of our US one China policy, where we help Taiwan, but we say we're not, kind of thing. It's like shared responsibility means it's your responsibility, basically, but they are doing a ton. I mean, it's not to say that they're not working day and night to keep those environments as secure as they possibly can. They certainly are, but legally, you're going to have some difficulty if you got to come to them and say it's their fault, right?
Absolutely. There are things that they're absolutely responsible for. So, for example, if they're offering you a virtual machine that is managed, they're responsible for patching the machine for vulnerabilities. That's their responsibility. But if you have a database and you have users, it's your responsibility to define which users can access what data in the cloud. That's your responsibility. So it is a shared responsibility model. It just means that some things are managed by the cloud service providers, and some things are managed by the users. And by the way, back to Arick's point, that does not translate easily between the various cloud service providers. So the responsibilities are different, whether you're talking about AWS or Azure, and the configurations are different. That's why it's so complex. That's why, analysts like Gartner say that over 75% of security failures in the cloud happen because of IAM, identity and access mismanagement, basically, because people do not define permissions properly. And this is where we, as Ermetic, have brought a lot of innovation to the market and basically created a category in cloud security that looks at that, which is today is part of a broader category. We see a lot of consolidation in the cloud infrastructure security market, where people are looking to combine different point solutions into one overarching security platform, which we offer at Ermetic. But our differentiation from others is when others are looking more at network or workloads, we're looking more on the identity side.
That's interesting. And so did you deploy first in AWS and then Microsoft, and then, or is there a sort of order or a cadence? And then what are your insights on the disparities between those environments?
So it's a great question. So as a startup company, right, we've been around for years, right? You go with the market, right? So we started AWS first because that was the biggest market share. And also, as a startup, you don't immediately sell into the large, Fortune 10 enterprises, which tend to be more Microsoft jobs. You start selling more into the medium enterprise side, which is more Amazon friendly, right? So that was where our market started, but we quickly had to expand as our platform was in a huge demand also from the large enterprise world. So today we cover both AWS, Microsoft, GCP, and there is a long list of cloud service providers that we're looking at next. Of course, Oracle, which is getting more and more market share. They're extremely aggressive. There is IBM, there is Ali, of course, right? We have a lot of customers, multinationals that have operation in China, so they have to run on the local cloud service provider, and they need security there as well. And by the way, we also have the Gov clouds, right? So the AWS Gov Cloud, Azure Gov Cloud, the federal government and the local government is moving to the cloud as well, in large numbers. So there's also a huge market potential there as well.
Yeah, and since you brought up Alibaba, one lurking question in the back of my mind, and I think in lots of minds around the business world, is this whole concern about a bifurcated web of around China and the East moving in a different direction where it will not be so easy to move across, which is kind of hard to fathom when you think about the internet. The whole point was that we would all get access to it and have this engine running for anyone who wants to use it. What are your thoughts about that? Is there any tangible way in which we are officially seeing a sort of bifurcation, or is that still just a concern?
It's hard to say. I think for now it's still mostly concern, but it is based on real grounds. I mean, we do see, different political movements, right? We see the world in Eastern Europe and how it unfolds and the global impact that it has. And I think the jury's still out, right? Nobody knows what China's global position on the war between Russia and Ukraine is, right? And I think they're still kind of debating where they should be going. And I think there's a lot that's going to happen in the coming months once they decide, right? It's going to be a huge implication whether the world is going back to a very bipolar structure or into something that is more fluid and hybrid than we were used to be during the Cold War, right? So,
Yeah. Well, I mean, like I mentioned, the Colonial Pipeline hack and some of these other hacks are probably from state actors, because there's a certain point at which you just need the breadth and the depth of expertise to be able to penetrate these systems, and the persistence, right, and the patience, because a lot of these hacks, I mean, what'll happen is an individual at the company gets hacked personally. I think that's what happened with Colonial. And then some credentials were taken from his home computer and then used at the work computer to kind of get in. Then sometimes they just sit around and lurk in the background for days, weeks, even months, right? Real quick, Arick, what do you think?
absolutely. So in my previous life before founding Ermetic, I founded a cybersecurity services company, and we were doing a lot of incident response work, helping the largest multinational in the world cope with cybersecurity threats and attacks. And we've been in investigation. We were found threat actors sitting for years in customer and client environments, 4 years, sometimes 5 years, sometimes moving extremely slow, sometimes selling the access to other threat actors. So someone actually broke in and then they sold the access to someone who was actually interested in that company, right? And the information, right? So we've seen it all.
Yeah, Arick, Olden, I'll bring you back in to kind of comment on this. It does speak again to the critical importance of having a plan for how you're going to be able to manage these things. And you have to identify the friction points and solve as much as you can at a time. And I think that's the real magic of this approach that you've taken with a standard, an open source standard, is you're trying to get everyone up to a sort of base level from which we can do a better job of tackling the last miles of security. What do you think, Arick Olden?
Yeah, it is. Arick raises a lot of great points, and I think I'd emphasize on the thing that's common with everybody, in whether you're in any part of the globe, in the East or the West, is people are the weak link. And if you're trying to compromise something, you can get to the thing that you're trying to fastest if you compromise the end user. And from a offense versus defense, as security practitioners, we need to defend against potentially millions and millions of people trying to come in, not necessarily all intentionally, but they may get compromised and then they become an unknowing vector where they bring in something. And so the defense, you've got to defend against millions of places. On the offense, you just have to do it right once. And once you do it, then you can kind of have successive compromises and other things. You can sell access and so forth. And there's a massive dark web ecosystem that's been around for years. If you want to buy someone's information, you can get their passwords, you can get their bank accounts, you can get their trading accounts for a remarkably cheap cost, right? And I think that's because if you are the bad actor, you compromise someone, you can sell it 100 times over, right? It's just the same thing over and again. It's a easy to replicate product, if you will. So I think all of that said, what do you do about it? And I think the first step that we encourage people to do is to start at the identity and work outwards and figure out, how do you harden the identity? And probably the best step that everybody can do is figure out how to get rid of passwords, because that's the most often way that people are compromised, right? They get the credentials, the user ID, and the password. So there's a whole lot of great technologies that are out there that do what's called passwordless authentication or multi-factor authentication. And our role in all of this is to make those kind of technologies easy to roll out to your applications and your data, right? So you can use standards to deliver it. But the thing to probably eliminate the 80-20 rule, the simplest thing you can do to give you the best amount of protection is to harden the identity, starting with getting rid of the password.
Wow. And who doesn't want to get rid of passwords, right? You know, I'm thinking to myself too, as we're talking about this, Steve had mentioned the zero trust networking architecture and this whole concept around ephemeral access to systems, which is really taking hold now. And it seems to me that is going to be a fairly effective policy at dealing with what Arick mentioned. I'll throw this over to Arick Olden first, and then we'll get Stephen, about these threat actors that lurk in the background. If you're lurking in the background all the time, you have to watch out for this stuff. But if you have a zero trust architecture, I think you're helping to protect against all those who already snuck in. Is that about right, Arick Olden, and then Steve?
Yeah, zero trust is a great strategy, and I think it also is used a lot with different meanings. So the way that I define zero trust is to think about every time a request to access data or some other resource is made, that you're always authenticated on every request, and every request has to be authorized. And if you want to be really thorough, every request should get audited and logged. So that's an alternative to the old approach of a network-centric model where you'd have strong perimeter, but if you could breach that perimeter, you could run wild inside of the network and do all sorts of bad things. So in multi-cloud, when everyone's working, especially with everyone working remote, you've got a new problem where your users are all outside the firewall, right? They're in a Starbucks and they're on Wi-Fi. And so the idea of using a perimeter has to evolve so that you can not rely solely on the perimeter. Perimeters are always going to be there, right? But it's not enough when you have people that are accessing this remotely. So rolling out zero trust and doing it with this continuous limited least permission model where everything's authenticated, that's a huge step forward, and a lot of different ways to do it. But I think it starts with understanding what are your assets, your applications, and your data, and how are users able to access them, and making sure that every point they're always authenticated, access is always checked, access is always small, and you log everything that happens.
And as you're talking there, I was thinking about what you mentioned a minute ago of what your solution helps organizations do, which is try different security technologies, try different access technologies, try different policies, try different things, and really shorten the cycle time from idea to actual implementation and then testing, right? Once you implement something, you have to monitor and see. It's not, you put a new lock in the door. Okay. Did it work? I don't know. I hope so. I would certainly think so, but you have to then continue to monitor. And that's good news for people in the security business. There are always going to be jobs. I mean, we are able to gather much, much more data. And then, of course, you have to profile that data and understand the patterns, the usage patterns of this person versus that person. All that stuff comes into play. And if you can leverage it, all the better, because you know the baseline pattern of this employee versus that employee that can help you keep your environment secure. Don't touch that dial, folks. We'll be right back. You are listening to Inside Analysis.
Welcome back to Inside Analysis. Here's your host, Arick Goomanovsky.
All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, talking about the intersection of identity and security. I'll bring Steve Evans back in from Teneo. know, I'm always thinking of metaphors and examples and similes and so forth. And what we're talking about really is like getting the all access pass backstage. You know, you can go back and hang out with the band or something. It's very exciting. You got the all access pass, but it could be handed off to someone else, right? Like, oh, is that really your all access pass? Is it your name? It doesn't look like you on that pass. I mean, these are issues of identity management and resolution, right? And in the break, you were talking about one of the newer tactics that's being used, I think, ring fences or something. Tell us a bit about that.
Sure. It's just really it's around segmentation or micro-segmentation. What we're finding is that, yes, you know, we were exactly right. Arick was exactly right earlier about, you know, what happens when somebody when there is a breach. You know, how do you mitigate that? How do you stop the hackers from advancing, the bad actors? And one of the techniques that we were talking about in the break was something called segmentation or micro-segmentation. In which case, what you do is ring fence your application. So you put like a border around the application itself internally in your network. And that ensures that only your database servers can talk to your web servers, and only your web servers can talk to your application servers, and this kind of thing. If anybody else tries to do that, they hit the fence, you get logged, you know, somebody's trying to do something they're not supposed to be doing, and you stop it. So you get that kind of early warning system when one of these hackers tries to do their reconnaissance inside of your network to see what's going on. So yeah, it's one of the newer techniques. It's not really new, but it's as we talked about, it's more mature, easier to manage, easier to integrate with the business's end goals and their and wrap it around the important crown jewels, if you will. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm thinking to myself, and we've talked before about the Kubernetes conference I went to late last year, and how there are all these observability vendors. I mean, observability was a new term to me, at least about 2 years ago, and now there are like 80 vendors doing observability. Everyone is picking up on something, but what that's hinting at is the fact that you can now capture so much in terms of data feeds. You can capture data feeds of all different shapes and kinds. There are companies like Mesmo we've done some work with that help you kind of orchestrate all that machine data so you don't have to pay for storing it all. But there's a lot of useful information in there. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, is it now feasible and economically wise to build patterns of behavior around individual people? Like Bob will often go to the Starbucks in the morning and log in there. Then he'll come into the office and be there for a while, and he sometimes logs in at night. I mean, that's a pretty simple pattern. It's just 3 locations, but it has to be assigned to a person and then enforced in a policy that notices these things. So if he logs in from somewhere else, from across town or something, oh, is that correct? Is that doable? Is it practical these days? Is that happening? What do you think?
Yeah, it's doable and available. So you definitely want to be looking into that kind of capability. So when the example that you were giving there was perfect. Let's look at the individual user. Let's build a baseline around their behavior. And then, you know, everybody's heard about AI these days, right? I mean, chatbot and all that may be the more exciting thing in the news, but AI has some extremely good applications in the security space around using it to do behavioral analytics and building deep neural nets around specific use cases around security to allow that AI to assist us humans in doing what we need to do to kind of surface things that we might not have seen otherwise about when Bob tries to go to a specific server to do something he doesn't usually do, and certainly doesn't do it from the location he's at. So those kind of behavioral analytics are available in different technologies and solutions. And in fact, we recommend generally, before you do anything, understand what you have right now.
Right.
Get that baseline, you know, because the last thing you want to do is start blocking your users for doing something they should be, you know, and have been doing, and you want them doing, because that will be an immediate disaster for you when your VP of a department gets blocked because they happen to be at a Starbucks.
Right. Well, that's exactly right. And it is a problem, you know, and when there you need that very quick path to remediation. Everyone is using the text messages now, two-factor authentication. Is this really you? Well, if the bad guy steals your phone and has logged into your phone, for example, that's, you know, that could be a problem, but that's pretty uncommon. But Arick from Ermetic, I'll throw it over to you. this is another one of these challenges to focus on. And I think AI is going to be very, very helpful. Machine learning, the unblinking eye of machine learning, being able to track all these patterns and dynamically notice what's different. What do you think about the power of AI for good guys versus bad guys in this space going forward?
Well, it's a good question. Maybe we should ask ChatGPT, see what the answer is for that. But I think it's definitely the threat actors are going into automation, right? So whatever you put a server out there, and of course, whenever you're in the cloud, your environment is constantly being scanned, and that's happening automatically, right? And again, there is a there is a fine line, whether it's an AI or just an automation with some orchestration.
Right.
The threat actors are definitely, adopting automation as much as possible, and so are also the good guys, right? On the defense side, I take us vendors as good guys,
right?
I agree. We see that AI is helping, right? So anomaly detection, sometimes those algorithms can detect a lot of things that, just humanly impossible to identify automatically. But I think we're not there yet. I mean, the AI today is not advanced enough to really replace either an operator or a CISO, right? So I think the AI has still a long way to go before the security industry can really take advantage of AI at a large scale, and that AI becomes, central to what we are building. We're still catering for the human operator a lot, right? And whether it's Arick and his company who are more kind of catering for the developer, or us who are looking at developers, cloud operations, DevOps, or CISOs, right? We're not catering for an algorithm or a program, right? We're catering for human operators. But time will change that, I think.
Yeah, that's a good point. Arick Olden from Strata Data, I'll bring you back in. Just the name of your company, Strata, reminds me of layers, right? And anytime you have a security environment, you want to have layers of protection. So you have your outside layer, your perimeter, your inside layers. We talked about the zero trust architecture, where it's really baked into the process. Almost think like security cameras in all the hallways leading up to the executive's office, for example. It's like, yeah, you got through the outer perimeter and the inner perimeter, but now we see you coming down the hallway. We can double lock the door, do things of this nature. You want these layers of protection, right, Arick?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're spot on. And the name of the company, we call it Strata, because in identity orchestration, you've got different layers. And if you think about the cloud, there's what's needed is a layer that goes over all of the clouds that can then orchestrate things through multiple clouds, where you treat the clouds as peers on a east and west kind of basis, right? Amazon and Azure and Google and Oracle and so forth. But then going into each of those clouds, then you have the stack, if you will, right? You've got your application, your data, your network, and so forth. And so really thinking holistically, there's no inside or outside. It's all just relative, like pieces of an onion, if you will, right? And at the center is the identity and the user. So we really think about it in this integrated fabric type model, where everything has to be connected to the other things because everything's distributed. And that's where this really comes to bear, is how do you make things that are far flung everywhere, all in different places, all in different technologies, play well together? And that's really what we think identity orchestration can automate. And then standards like IDQL can help you scale and do that in a consistent way.
Yeah, well, that's good stuff. I mean, the experts on our show today are all out there helping companies define their policies. And I guess real quick, 60 seconds in this third segment, Steve, I'll throw it over to you. The cool thing about policy these days is you can define it. You can actually deploy policy and have it work. It used to be policy was in a paper somewhere you hope someone read, right, Steve?
Yeah, I mean, the holy grail right now is policy at the point of need. Is where you're looking to, it's what you're looking to achieve. You want that policy to be to feed into the business goals as what they're trying to achieve, not the other way around. You don't want to start with IT and then they build policies. You want that to support the business, and you want it to be applied at the exact time, exact place that it needs to be, whether that's at the endpoint. Maybe it's in the cloud. We talked about cloud is a great way to do that. You can use AI to help with that, but it's not going to replace our ability to make those policies anytime soon. So it's important to get the policy together and have it support the business priorities from the beginning.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I like that policy at the point of need, basically as and when you need it. And what you want to watch out for are overburdensome policies that just dissuade people and annoy your staff and annoy your partners. And you don't want any of that. Well, folks, you've been listening to Inside Analysis podcast bonus segment coming up next. Okay, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here today on a fun show with several expert professionals in the industry: Arick Olden from Strata Data, Steve Evans from Teneo, and Arick Goomanovsky from Ermetic. And Steve, you just mentioned something funny. There was a report from 2020 that said 3/4 of people don't care if they're hacked. Is that right?
Yeah. 75% of the people are not concerned if they're hacked at all. So not only do we have to have policies that are going to, appropriate for the business, but also somehow we have to account for that as well. We have to account for those people.
Yeah, well, not everyone's going to care. I mean, it's hard to find good help. I'll throw it over to Arick Olden. You do need to find a way to sort of imbue the importance of security in your staff and the people, or just look for good people. What do you think, Arick?
Yeah, it's funny. It goes back to the notion that the people are the weakest link. And, when they don't want to help themselves, you got to think about some other thing, because it's disheartening when you say that. Well, what do you do, right? And, I think about the balance of convenience and security, where I think a lot of the multi-factor authentication technologies early on struggled because they were good for the company, but were really hard to use and weren't convenient. And so I think the idea that you can replace passwords with, say, something people always have on their phone, with, again, a standard in the form of FIDO passkeys is really cool, because now you can get rid of the password and you say, look, you don't even have to remember it, Mr. End User, Miss End User. You can just hold your phone up and it'll check you. And that way we made it more convenient while we made it more secure. Mm-hmm. So maybe you can make it secure in spite of the user. Play to their basic laziness. Maybe that's the way we should do it.
That's funny. I'll bring in Arick from Ermetic. I'm always thinking of fun stories from my past, and I remember talking to a very senior level guy at Chase Bank. This is back in my risk management days, and I asked him, well, how do you keep your folks in line? Is it obviously the old balance of carrot and stick? He said, no, it's all stick. And I was like, well, I'm not sure if that's the best way to go, but he was all about the stick, just whacking people when they do something wrong. There should be some balance, but Arick, what do you think?
Well, definitely it's about balance. Look, I've served in the military for like 17 years, and you would imagine that in the military it's all stick, right? Then I think in the military it was, for me, only carrots. Yeah, I mean, you couldn't really. I mean, when you're asking people to do, like, if you're an employee in a factory and you're doing a very repetitive job, right, that you can measure easily, right, then you can maybe use sticks to keep people in line. But if you need them to do creative work, you can't force people to do creative work, right? You have to encourage them and inspire them and empower them, and only then they will do creative work, right? So you can't do that with a stick. I mean, maybe if it's a golden one, maybe, but even that goes not that long away, right? So you really have to have a lot of carrots, and it's becoming more and more challenging in our days, right? So, us vendors on the startup world, right? Like, it's a place where everyone is becoming a founder and doing great exits or building great companies, right? It's very difficult to keep good talent and excellent talent in the company, right? When they can leave tomorrow and found their own shop, right? And probably do better than you are because they're more, because they're better and, more talented than you are, right? So how do you make them work in your company, right? It's a everyday challenge, and I'm sure Arick and Steve can share more about that, but
Yeah.
probably in challenges.
No, that's a good point. I think good management. I mean, I'll throw this last question over to maybe Steve and then Arick to close out. But I think that good management is greatly underappreciated. We went through, I think it was in the 80s and the 90s in the US, there was this whole move to kind of kill middle management and who needs these people anyway. And I think that was the time that a lot of companies lost perspective on what it means to have a good manager. And I'll just tell very quickly, well, the one great manager I had, I couldn't even believe it, which really shows you how rare it is. Remember, I had just taken a job at the Data Warehousing Institute, my last job back in 2005. And he moved me up to Seattle, and I'm in there in his office Monday morning. And it was like the second week, and we went through various things. And then he said, so at the end of the meeting, he goes, so what can I do for you? And I remember thinking, did some VP just walk in over my shoulder? Oh, you're talking to me? What can you do for me? It shocked me, and it shouldn't have. That's what a manager should be like. But real quick, Steve, what do you think?
No, I agree 100%. When COVID hit, that really put the managers to the test. That was when we got to find out who was really a good manager, who wasn't, who could handle that. People had to implement things differently. We had huddles, daily huddles and more remote communication. People got used to communicating via video.
Yeah.
And just wherever you could, you created ways to do that. I think people either sunk or they swam in that. I think I was in the swim camp, I'd like to think anyways.
Right.
But having the right technology in place definitely also made that communication easier, right? You needed some kind of platform that allowed you to share and allowed you to collaborate on a daily basis and it not be onerous. It needed to have zero friction or very low friction to do that and do it securely.
Yeah. And last, just 60 seconds left from Arick Olden, Strata Data. How do you imbue the importance of good management?
Yeah, good management, I think, is a combination of leadership and support, right? And I think when you think about the top-down approaches in the past, you have a lot of resentment and resistance to that. Because, people feel like, hey, you're going to micromanage me. The number one reason people leave companies is not because the company's bad, but they have a bad manager. Right. And the number one reason people leave a manager or think they're bad is because that manager micromanages.
Right.
So at the heart of all of that, I think, is the notion of autonomy and the ability to say, hey, invest really well in your upfront hiring, because if you hire the right person, she's going to figure it out. You throw her into a situation that the right people will swim, to Steve's point, they won't sink. The job of a manager is, I think, to hire people and to make that right call and to find that right person, and then to say, hey, how do I make you effective in taking roadblocks out of your way? Anyways, that's just my philosophy that I've seen work really well, is give the people control and hire the right people. And I know it sounds cliche, but so often you get it wrong. It's because you're micromanaging somebody because you don't have confidence that they can do the job. Well, you hired the wrong person.
Right. That's right. What a wonderful show today, folks. Look all these guys up online. We'll talk to you next time. You've been listening to Inside Analysis.